The golden chandeliers cast their warm glow across the mahogany tables of Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny stars, while the soft murmur of conversations created an elegant symphony of fine dining. It was the kind of place where deals worth millions were sealed with handshakes, where power dressed in tailored suits and spoke in measured tones. At table 12, a woman sat alone, her posture erect despite the weight of exhaustion pressing on her shoulders. Victoria Sterling, 26 years old and already the CEO of Sterling Tech Industries, had just concluded a merger that would reshape the entire software landscape. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, her navy blazer impeccably tailored, but beneath the polished exterior lay the kind of pressure that could crush lesser souls. She had arrived at this restaurant not to celebrate, but to decompress from another day of boardroom battles and shareholder demands. 3 tables away, Michael Harrison finished cutting his daughter's chicken into bite-sized pieces. At 35, he possessed the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of sleepless nights and responsibility shouldered too young. His daughter Emma, barely 7 years old with pigtails bouncing as she chattered, represented his entire world. Tonight was their monthly tradition. Dinner at a nice restaurant, just the two of them. A small luxury he could barely afford, but refused to deny her. Victoria's moment of peace shattered when 3 men approached her table. They moved with the swagger of those accustomed to getting their way, their expensive suits unable to mask the alcohol on their breath or the predatory gleam in their eyes. The first, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a Rolex that caught the light, leaned against her table with false familiarity. Well, if it isn't the Ice Queen herself, he slurred, his voice carrying across the now quieting restaurant. Victoria Sterling, right? Saw you on the business channel. You know, you'd be even prettier if you smiled more. Victoria's jaw tightened. She had faced hostile takeovers and boardroom coups, but somehow these men made her skin crawl in ways that corporate adversaries never could. Gentlemen, I'm trying to enjoy my dinner. Please respect my privacy. The second man, younger but equally intoxicated, laughed dismissively. Come on, sweetheart. We're just being friendly. Why don't you join us for drinks? I bet underneath all that corporate ice, there's a real woman waiting to have some fun. The restaurant's other patrons began to take notice. Conversations halted mid-sentence as heads turned toward the unfolding drama. Servers hesitated in the corners, uncertain whether to intervene. The maitre d' stood frozen near the entrance, clearly weighing the social standing of the 3 men against his duty to protect his customer. Victoria felt the familiar walls closing in, the same suffocating sensation she had experienced too many times before. Men who believed her success was an invitation, who saw her achievements as a challenge to be conquered rather than respected. She stood slowly, gathering her purse with hands that trembled slightly despite her outward composure. I said no, she repeated, her voice steady but carrying an edge of steel. Now please leave me alone. The third man, emboldened by his companion's laughter, reached out to touch her arm. Don't be like that, honey. We're just trying to show you a good time. A successful woman like you must get lonely, right? All work and no play? That's when Michael Harrison stood up. He had been trying to ignore the situation, focusing on Emma's animated description of her school play, but the sight of 3 grown men cornering a woman half their combined weight triggered something primal in him. He had seen enough bullying, enough intimidation, enough of the strong preying on those they perceived as vulnerable. Not tonight. Not in front of his daughter. Leave her alone. The words cut through the restaurant's tension like a blade. Michael's voice was quiet but carried the kind of authority that made people stop and listen. He rose from his chair with deliberate slowness, his 6'2" frame unfolding like a mountain emerging from shadow. He wasn't the biggest man in the room, wasn't the richest or most powerful, but something in his bearing made the 3 harassers pause. The silver-haired man turned with irritation. Mind your own business, pal. We're just having a conversation with the lady. No, Michael said, taking a step forward. You're not. You're harassing someone who clearly wants to be left alone. So I'll say it again, leave her alone. Emma looked up from her plate, confusion flickering across her young face. She had never seen her daddy like this, not angry, exactly, but radiating a quiet intensity that seemed to fill the space around him. Other children might have been frightened, but Emma felt only pride. This was her hero, her protector, doing what heroes do. The youngest of the 3 men puffed out his chest, clearly unused to being challenged. You want to make something of this, buddy? You know who we are? I could buy and sell you 10 times over. Michael smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. I don't care if you could buy and sell this entire restaurant. The lady asked you to leave her alone. That's all that matters. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Servers backed away as patrons held their breath, sensing that something was about to break. Victoria found herself caught between gratitude and frustration. She had spent years building her reputation as someone who could handle anything, and now this stranger was fighting battles she should fight herself. The silver-haired man stepped closer to Michael, close enough that the smell of expensive whiskey was overpowering. "You're making a big mistake, friend. We're regular customers here. Management knows us. They know our money talks louder than whatever pathetic salary you make at your little job." "Maybe," Michael said calmly. "But right now, they're watching you harass a woman in their restaurant. How do you think that looks for their reputation?" As if summoned by his words, the maitre d' finally found his courage and approached the group. Behind him came 2 security guards, their presence adding weight to the moment. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the restaurant could feel it. "Gentlemen," the maitre d' said with careful politeness, "I'm going to have to ask you to return to your table or leave the premises. You're disturbing other guests." The 3 men looked around the room, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes upon them, of phones potentially recording their behavior, of the social media storm that could follow. In the modern world, reputations could be destroyed faster than they could be built, and even wealth had its limits against public opinion. They retreated, but not gracefully. Muttered threats and promises of consequences followed them as they stumbled toward the exit, their bravado deflating with each step. The restaurant slowly exhaled, conversations gradually resuming as the immediate danger passed. Victoria stood frozen beside her table, her composure finally cracking. She had faced down boardrooms full of hostile executives, had stared down billionaire investors trying to steal her company, but this moment of vulnerability in a public space had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Michael turned toward her, expecting gratitude, perhaps an invitation to join her for coffee, maybe just a simple thank you. Instead, Victoria's first words hit him like cold water. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her voice was sharp, cutting. "Do you realize the complications you've just created for me?" Michael blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, what?" "Those men, they have connections. Power. Money. Now they're going to remember this, remember me, and it's going to make my professional life infinitely more difficult." Victoria's eyes blazed with a fury that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I don't need rescuing. I especially don't need it from someone who has no understanding of the consequences." The words stung more than Michael expected. He had acted on instinct, on the simple principle that no one should have to endure harassment alone. He looked at his daughter, who was watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes, then back at Victoria. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't understand your world. But I understand right and wrong. And what those men were doing was wrong." Without waiting for a response, he returned to his table, helped Emma gather her things, and left the restaurant. The golden glow that had seemed so welcoming an hour ago now felt cold and artificial, a fitting backdrop for a good deed punished. Victoria watched him go, something twisting uncomfortably in her chest. She tried to return to her dinner, but the food had grown cold, and her appetite had vanished entirely. Around her, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but she felt more alone than ever. The truth was more complicated than her harsh words had suggested. Victoria Sterling had learned long ago that accepting help from men came with strings attached, expectations that needed to be managed or rejected outright. Her rise to CEO had been marked by countless moments when supposed allies had revealed ulterior motives, when professional assistance had come with personal prices she wasn't willing to pay. Her father had been the first lesson. Charles Sterling, founder of Sterling Tech, had groomed her as his successor while simultaneously undermining her confidence at every turn. "Men will try to use your success as a way into your bed," he had warned her repeatedly. "Trust no one who offers help, without being asked. Independence is your only protection." The lesson had been reinforced by a steady parade of mentors, advisors, and colleagues who had offered guidance with one hand while reaching for something else with the other. By the time she reached the executive suite, Victoria had built walls so high and thick that genuine kindness couldn't penetrate them. But as she sat alone in that expensive restaurant, picking at her cold meal, she couldn't shake the image of the man who had stood up for her. There had been no calculation in his eyes, no expectation of reward. He had acted purely on principle, and her response had been to cut him down for it. Michael, meanwhile, drove home through the Queen's night with Emma chattering in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the complexity of what had just occurred. Their small apartment, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, furniture mostly from second-hand stores, felt like a sanctuary after the cold grandeur of Manhattan's elite dining scene. "Daddy, why was that lady mad at you?" Emma asked as he tucked her into bed. "You were helping her, like when you helped Mrs. Chen with her groceries." Michael smoothed her hair, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, People have been hurt so many times that they can't tell the difference between someone trying to help and someone trying to hurt them. The lady wasn't really mad at me. She was just scared. Will you still help people who are scared? Emma asked. Her 7-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Always, Michael promised, and meant it. 3 weeks later, fate orchestrated their second meeting at a children's hospital charity gala. Michael hadn't planned to attend. The tickets were far beyond his budget, but his company's HR department had won a table in a raffle and needed volunteers to fill the seats. He had only agreed because Emma could come along, and she had been excited about the fancy party for weeks. Victoria was there in her official capacity, Sterling Tech being one of the hospital's major donors. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making small talk with the kind of people who considered $10,000 donations as casual as buying coffee. She spotted Michael across the room before he saw her, and for a moment she considered avoiding him entirely. But Emma was with him, a little girl in a pink dress that was clearly her finest outfit, spinning in delighted circles as she admired the ballroom's decorations. Something about the child's pure joy softened the edges of Victoria's carefully constructed defenses. When Emma accidentally bumped into Victoria while chasing bubbles from a party favor machine, the collision of their worlds became inevitable. "I'm sorry," Emma gasped, looking up at Victoria with wide, apologetic eyes. "I didn't mean to bump you. Your dress is so pretty, you look like a princess." Victoria found herself smiling despite herself. "Thank you. That's a beautiful dress you're wearing too. Are you enjoying the party? It's the fanciest place I've ever been," Emma declared with the honesty that only children possess. "Daddy says we're here to help sick kids, and that makes it extra special. Do you help sick kids too?" Before Victoria could answer, Michael appeared, slightly out of breath from chasing his daughter through the crowd. When he saw Victoria, his expression became carefully neutral, polite but distant. "Emma, you need to apologize for running into the lady," he said gently. "I already did, Daddy. And she said my dress was beautiful." "What's your name?" Emma asked Victoria directly. "Victoria," she replied, crouching down to Emma's level. "What's yours?" "Emma Harrison." "That's my daddy, Michael. He's the best daddy in the whole world. He works really hard so I can have nice things, and he reads me stories every night, and he makes pancakes shaped like animals on Sundays." Michael's cheeks reddened slightly at his daughter's enthusiastic endorsement. "Emma, I'm sure Miss Victoria has other people to talk to." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, surprising herself, "I'd love to hear more about these animal pancakes. They sound much more interesting than most of the conversations I've had tonight." What followed was the kind of evening Victoria hadn't experienced since childhood. Emma regaled her with stories of school and friends, and the elaborate games she invented in the small park near their apartment. Michael, initially wary, gradually relaxed as he saw his daughter's happiness at having a grown-up who actually listened to her rambling tales. For Victoria, watching Michael with Emma was a revelation. She had seen plenty of powerful men at business dinners, men who commanded rooms and moved markets, but she had never seen strength like this, the kind that showed in how gently he tied his daughter's shoe, how patiently he answered her 100th question of the evening, how his entire face lit up when she laughed. As the evening wound down, Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, exhausted by excitement and too much cake. Victoria watched Michael carefully lift his daughter, adjusting her dress, so she stayed covered, whispering soft reassurances when she stirred. "She's lucky to have you," Victoria said quietly. Michael looked at her, searching for sarcasm or hidden meaning, but finding only sincerity. "I'm the lucky one. She's everything good in my world." About that night at the restaurant, Victoria began, then stopped. How could she explain years of disappointment and betrayal in a few sentences? How could she make him understand that her harsh words had been armor, not truth? "You don't owe me any explanations," Michael said gently. "We all have our reasons for the things we do." But Victoria found herself wanting to explain anyway. As they walked toward the valet station, Emma sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, words began to spill out that she hadn't spoken to anyone in years. "My father used to tell me that men would always want something in return for their help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For years, I thought he was just being protective. Then I started climbing the corporate ladder, and learned he was right. Every mentor who offered guidance wanted something. Every advisor who gave counsel expected consideration. Every man who stood up for me in meetings expected me to be grateful in ways that had nothing to do with business." Michael listened without judgment as she continued. "By the time I became CEO, I had learned that independence was survival. That accepting help meant accepting obligations I couldn't afford to have. When you stepped in that night, my first thought wasn't gratitude, it was panic. What would you want from me? How would I have to pay for your assistance? They had reached the valet stand, but neither made any move to claim their vehicles. Emma slept on, cushioned by her father's steady breathing and the security of unconditional love. I built my walls so high I forgot there might be people who help because it's right, not because they want something in return, Victoria concluded. I'm sorry I hurt you for being one of those people. Michael was quiet for a long moment. My wife used to say that the world had enough people who take advantage of others, he finally said. She said our job was to be different, to help without expecting anything back. I've tried to raise Emma that way, to show her that kindness doesn't have to come with conditions. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Cancer took her when Emma was 3. Some days I wonder if I'm doing any of this right, if I'm enough for Emma on my own. Victoria looked at the sleeping child, at the complete trust written across her peaceful features, and knew with absolute certainty that Emma Harrison was one of the luckiest children in the world. Trust me, she said softly, you're more than enough. Over the following months, their lives intersected in small but meaningful ways. Victoria found herself attending more charity events, partly because her company required her presence, but increasingly because she hoped to see Emma's bright smile and Michael's quiet strength. When a gossip blog published unflattering photos of Victoria leaving a business dinner with a male colleague, suggesting an inappropriate relationship that could impact her company's stock price, it was Michael who called to offer support. I saw the news, he said simply. I wanted you to know that anyone who really knows you would never believe those lies. You barely know me, Victoria protested. I know you spend your free time at charity events for sick children. I know you remember the names of every server at every event we've attended. I know you bought Emma a book about female scientists after she mentioned wanting to be an astronaut. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. His faith in her, offered without hesitation or condition, touched something deep in Victoria's carefully guarded heart. When the scandal continued to spiral, threatening both her reputation and her company's stability, she found herself calling Michael not for his business advice. He was a construction manager, not a corporate strategist, but for his perspective, his steadiness, his reminder that there was a world beyond boardrooms and stock prices. The crisis passed, as such things always did, but Victoria's feelings for Michael only deepened. She began to understand that love wasn't about finding someone who could match her success or status, but about finding someone who saw her as more than her achievements, who cared about her happiness more than her portfolio. The first time Victoria invited Michael and Emma to her penthouse apartment, Emma's reaction was everything she could have hoped for and more. You live in the clouds. Emma gasped, pressing her face against the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Manhattan's skyline. Are you a magic princess? Victoria laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in years. Just a regular person with a very nice view. Daddy, look. You can see everything from up here. It's like being a bird. Michael, meanwhile, stood somewhat overwhelmed in the marble entryway, taking in the artwork and furnishings that probably cost more than his annual salary. But Victoria barely noticed his discomfort. She was too busy watching Emma discover the hidden reading nook by the window, complete with built-in bookshelves and cushioned seating. I had this built for whenever I needed to escape, Victoria explained. But I think it was really waiting for someone who would appreciate it properly. That evening, as Emma fell asleep curled up in the reading nook with a book about dragons, Victoria and Michael sat on the terrace sharing wine and conversation. The city stretched out below them like a constellation of dreams and possibilities. Are you sure about this? Michael asked quietly. Your world and mine, they're pretty different. Victoria looked at him, at this man who had shown her what real strength looked like, who had taught her that some things were worth more than money or power or status. I've spent my whole life in my world, she said. It's cold and calculating and ultimately empty. But your world. The one where fathers read bedtime stories and helped daughters chase bubbles at fancy parties. That world has something mine never did. What's that? Love without conditions. Happiness that doesn't depend on stock prices, or board approval or annual reports. A little girl who thinks I might be a magic princess just because I have a nice view. Michael reached for her hand, and this time, Victoria didn't pull away. The real test came 6 months later when Victoria decided to introduce Michael and Emma to her family at their annual Christmas gathering. The Sterling family had been gathering at the Connecticut estate for 3 generations, a tradition of excess and expectation that Victoria had always endured rather than enjoyed. Her mother, Catherine Sterling, greeted the news of Victoria's relationship with barely concealed horror. A construction manager. She had repeated over the phone, as if the words tasted bitter. Victoria, darling. Surely you understand that this reflects on the family name. The business associates who'll be there, The social expectations. Mother, Victoria interrupted firmly, Michael and Emma are important to me. If you can't welcome them, I won't be attending. It was the first time Victoria had ever issued such an ultimatum to her family, and the silence that followed was deafening. The Christmas gathering proved to be as awkward as expected. Victoria's extended family, accustomed to judging worth by net value and social connections, struggled to know how to treat Michael and Emma. The conversations were stilted, filled with the kind of polite condescension that Victoria had hoped her family was above. But Emma, in her innocent 7-year-old way, began to work her magic. She complimented Victoria's aunt on her jewelry, asked genuine questions about her cousins' careers, and showed such wonder at the estate's decorations that even the most cynical family members found themselves smiling. The turning point came when Victoria's grandfather, the family patriarch and founder of their fortune, found Emma in the library, carefully examining a first edition of Alice in Wonderland. "That's a very old book," he told her gently. "It's beautiful," Emma replied seriously. "Daddy taught me to be very careful with special books. Is it okay that I'm looking at it?" What followed was an hour-long conversation between a billionaire patriarch and a 7-year-old girl about books, stories, and the importance of taking care of precious things. By the end of the evening, Victoria's grandfather was teaching Emma to play chess, while Michael and Victoria's father discovered a mutual interest in building. One in construction, the other in corporate empires. It wasn't a complete transformation. There would always be family members who questioned Victoria's choice, who whispered about social compatibility and appropriate matches. But as Victoria watched Emma fall asleep between her and Michael, on the drive back to the city, she realized that their approval had stopped mattering somewhere along the way. The proposal happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening in Victoria's apartment. No grand gestures or elaborate planning, just Michael, Victoria, and Emma making dinner together, the kind of simple domestic scene Victoria had never imagined wanting but now couldn't imagine living without. Emma was telling them about her upcoming school play when she paused mid-sentence and looked seriously at both adults. "Daddy," she said, with the gravity only children can muster, "are you going to marry Victoria?" Michael nearly choked on his wine while Victoria felt her heart stop entirely. "Emma," Michael began, "that's not really, because I think you should," Emma continued matter-of-factly. "She makes you smile differently, and she lets me help her make pancakes, and she bought me the telescope for my birthday. Plus, if you marry her, she could be my mommy too, right?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. In all her planning and strategizing, all her careful construction of barriers and defenses, she had never anticipated this moment. A 7-year-old girl offering her the one thing she had never dared to hope for, a family. Michael looked at Victoria, seeing in her face the same wonder and terror he felt in his own chest. They had been dancing around the future for months, both afraid to voice the growing certainty that this was more than temporary happiness. "What do you think, Victoria?" he asked quietly. "Would you be willing to take on a package deal?" One slightly overwhelmed construction manager and his extremely opinionated daughter. Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, taking the child's small hands in her own. "Emma," she said softly, "would you really want me to be part of your family? Even though I'm still learning how to be good at the family stuff?" "You're already good at it," Emma said with absolute certainty. "You remember what books I like, and you help Daddy with the hard crossword puzzles, and you hug me when I'm sad about missing my other mommy. That's what families do." Victoria looked up at Michael, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of love and amazement she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, to all of it." The wedding took place 6 months later in the same children's hospital where they had reconnected, transformed into a garden paradise for one evening. It wasn't the society event Victoria's family had expected. There were no 500-person guest lists or designer gowns that cost more than cars. Instead, there were close friends, chosen family, and Emma, as the most important member of the wedding party. Victoria's dress was elegant but simple, chosen more for how it made Emma gasp with delight than for any fashion magazine approval. Michael wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to every important event in Emma's life, now upgraded with a boutonniere that Emma had helped select. But the moment that everyone would remember, the image that would be treasured in family albums for generations, came when Emma walked down the aisle scattering flower petals with serious concentration. At the altar, she stopped and looked at Victoria with shining eyes. "After this, can I call you Mom?" she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Victoria's carefully applied makeup didn't stand a chance against the tears that followed. "I would love that more than anything," she whispered back. As they exchanged vows, words about partnership and growth. About choosing each other every day. About building something stronger than either could create alone, Victoria realized that this was what she had been searching for all along without knowing it. Not a merger or acquisition, not a strategic alliance or beneficial partnership, but this. A construction manager who saw her as more than her achievements, and a 7-year-old girl who had taught her that the best families weren't built with money or status, but with love offered freely and accepted gratefully. The reception was held in Victoria's penthouse, but it felt nothing like her old isolated existence. Emma had decorated the terrace with handmade garlands and drawings of their new family. The adults might have been making polite conversation about business and philanthropy, but the real party was happening wherever Emma was. Teaching Victoria's serious business associates how to play games, showing them the telescope Victoria had given her, explaining with scientific precision why construction cranes were actually the most important machines in the city because they helped build homes for families. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Victoria found herself on the terrace with Michael and Emma, looking out over the city lights that had once seemed cold and distant but now felt warm with possibility. "No regrets?" Michael asked softly, his arm around Victoria's waist while Emma dozed against her shoulder. Victoria looked at her new family, her husband who had shown her what courage really meant, her daughter who had taught her that love multiplied rather than divided when shared freely, and smiled. "Only one," she said. Michael raised an eyebrow in concern. "I regret that it took me so long to say thank you," Victoria continued. "That night in the restaurant, when you stood up for me, I should have said thank you. Not for rescuing me, but for showing me what it looks like when someone does the right thing simply because it's right. For teaching me that some people really do help without expecting anything in return." "You're saying it now," Michael pointed out. "That's what matters." Victoria looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, trusting and secure in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by not one but two parents. The little girl who had asked if Victoria was a magic princess had gotten it backwards. Emma was the one with the real magic. The power to transform lives and heal hearts and build families from the most unlikely components. "Thank you," Victoria whispered into the city night, the words carrying all the gratitude she had been too afraid to express. All the love she had been too protected to offer. All the hope she had thought was beyond her reach. "Thank you for teaching me that the best things in life come not from what we achieve, but from what we choose to build together." Below them, Manhattan sparkled with 8 million dreams and possibilities. But up on the terrace of a penthouse apartment that had finally become a home, 3 people had found something worth more than all the success and status in the world. They had found each other, and in doing so, had discovered that sometimes the most important transactions in life can't be measured in dollars or stocks or quarterly reports, but only in moments like these, where love offered freely creates wealth that can never be quantified or lost.